We are live. Hi, everyone. How are you doing?
Hi, everyone. I haven't done one of these for a while. It's exciting. Welcome. Hope everyone had a nice weekend. Today we're back to talk to you about ebooks, which I didn't think I would be saying. We decided to stop ebooks a good 18 months ago, and I didn't think we'd ever do one again. However, we have rethought and have come back with we have a new proposed way of tackling ebooks, and the approach that we've just taken, and we want to share with you guys and see if it's something you'd be interested in doing also. So I guess just to introduce myself, I'm Fran. I'm head of global demand gen at Cognism, and I am with Jamie and Amy today, who have worked really closely on our ebook campaign. So Jamie, Amy, I don't know if you want to just introduce yourself to the audience.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so my name's Jamie. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Senior Demand Generation Manager here at Cognism. So I actually look after our marketing persona. So yeah, just been working on the campaign with Fran and Amy, and looking forward to getting into it.
Amazing.
Yeah, and I'm Amy. I'm a Demand Gen Content Manager, working really closely with Jamie on the marketing persona, and yeah, just was working on the ultimate ebook on producing ebooks recently.
Fab. Great. So we're going to kick off its usual format for us, to be honest. We've got some slides because we think it's better to kind of showcase what we've done, and it's easier to kind of write down these examples. So I'm going to kick off, share my screen. Please let us know in the chat if you can see. Just sharing this now, so hopefully everyone can see that. Please ask questions throughout. We'll try and respond on the chat, and we will also save some time at the end to answer questions also. So yeah, I'm going to kick off. So bringing ebooks into 2024. As mentioned previously, our ebook philosophy has somewhat changed. We know we need to change how ebooks are done. Cognism have spoken quite extensively about how we've moved from using our lead collection model and generating leads from ebooks and reaching out to our those who have downloaded and asking them for a follow-up meeting. And we've spoken very extensively about our shift to demand gen. So ebooks didn't necessarily sit under that new model. However, we have rethought this process, and we think that there is a place to do this. It's just how it's executed has changed. So how we would execute an ebook previously has changed how we would do it now. So I think, just to recap, it's pretty obvious that prospects they've been burned before, right? With companies targeting them with market reports and ebooks, and you would get targeted, you download it, it would be sort of pages and pages of a PDF, and then a day later you'd get a call off a sales rep inviting you for a meeting. Sometimes you hadn't had a chance to read the ebook. You may never read the ebook. You may open it and realize it's not quite for you. So we know that downloading this ebook doesn't equal intent to buy. And even if you are passing these leads over to sales, which we don't do at Cognism anymore, but even if you are still doing that and that's still in your model, there are better ways to do that. And we think if the ebook is value-led from the get-go, then it makes it a lot easier for sales to have those conversations. And also just as simple as like briefing sales on when the ebook's going out, top highlights that they can share from that. It also makes it easier for them to have a conversation. So alongside that, there's obviously, I touched on, like, traditionally it would be a long PDF format for ebooks, and we know there's so many other formats available. So we're going to show you today like how you can create an ebook in lots of different formats and continue to provide that value. So we know things need to change. So for us, this is our new ebook philosophy, very much aligns with our DG approach, which is whether you're collecting leads or not, and still operating under that lead gen model. I know that a lot of companies still are. You might have that model mapped out for the next 18 to 24 months. That's fine. There's ways that you can do both. You can provide value and collect leads. So the goal is, as I was saying, like, the goal for us is like, the goal should be to provide value for your ICP and provide quality content, regardless of if you're collecting those leads or not. It's making sure you're memorable. You want audiences to recall your brand when they later like come in market to buy. And also you really just want your ICP to be engaging with your brand up until they enter that buying process. And we believe like if you implement this new way of work for ebooks, then you're more likely to get engagement than if you're again just using a PDF format, which is like 100 pages long. So that's kind of the new philosophy. It's probably no surprise to anybody that it's all value-led, it's ungated, and it's, yeah, a DG first approach for us at Cognism. But hopefully even those who are operating under a different model can still take some advice from us and implement it in a way that suits your current business. And again, like I speak about this on LinkedIn a lot, and we speak about this a lot as a team. The real goal is to be creating these value-led journeys. So again, even if you are collecting leads, that's fine, but we need to think about what experience we are creating. So even if your sales team are calling up these leads, if you're providing a super value-led engaging experience, then the ebook or the content is likely to be memorable. And then we need to kind of resist getting people in a funnel and asking them for a demo straight away. We need to just try and continue to provide value at this stage. And there are loads of ways in which you can create pathways and value loops so that you actually end up generating your own audience. So instead of doing a spray and pray where you release an ebook, you build an email list, and you send a message saying, here's my ebook, it's fabulous, please download it. We think that there's different ways, and that's where the value loops come in. So if you are producing an ebook and you are talking about it on a live event, which I am actually right now, then that is me. That is me creating part of a value loop. So we've got our audience engaged, hopefully. And this is a way of me talking about this piece of content in a different format from a PDF. It's our owned audience. So we'll send a follow-up at the end, and hopefully keep sending you, hopefully you'll find the content we keep sending you valuable and engaging. The same with a newsletter, like you could talk about your ebook on a newsletter, and then that's like another way of sharing that value within the loop. So by value loops, I mean, we basically mean somewhere where you can consistently speak to your audience and you can build out your own audience, as opposed to cold email lists, which are unengaged, or like traditional like content syndication methods. So yeah, so the importance of creating a value-led journey. This graphic does show you like little ways in which we do that, but we've got loads of content on that we can share afterwards. And so I am going to hand over to Amy. Hopefully I've set the scene as to why we've done this and why it's important to us. Amy and Jamie actually worked on our own ebook, so I love Amy to kind of go through like exactly how we built it. So I will hand over to you, Amy, and be quiet.
Cool. So yeah, if you're going to create a value-led journey like Fran just talked about, then you really need to think about what value you're going to give away. So we can move on to the next slide, Fran. So this is especially important if you are gating your content, but to be honest, it should be a standard that you set for all ebooks. The aim is to not just get people to download it, it's to actually engage with it, because you want them to have a positive experience of your brand that they actually remember as a result of this ebook. So what you put in your ebook matters, and it can't just be a bunch of like recycled SEO blogs or things that you can pull together from Google. You do need to give away something that actually helps the reader like do something better in their jobs or solve a problem, something like that. So with this in mind, we try and set ourselves these like 3 rules that we measure our ebook content against. So for one, it should inform or teach your ICP about something that they want to learn about, they're interested in, or they want to problem solve. It should be accurate and credible using SME insights. And it should be unique, either your own research or your own insights, something you've put together. And we can move on to the next slide, please, Fran. So that quality and value shouldn't just stop with the content itself. There's a lot you can do with the format. help make that content more engageable or suit the needs of your ICP. Not everyone's going to like written content. Some personas might prefer video or audio. And if you're not sure what format is best, then there's no harm in doing some customer research to find out what format makes the most sense. For example, we spoke to Tom Bangay from Duro, and he is marketing to senior lawyers. So written content very much makes sense for them. But, you know, we created an audiobook for the CMO diary, and that was super successful. So there's no reason why you can't, like, you have to stick to a written format. And depending on the size of your project, you don't have to just limit yourself to one format. Again, using our Diary of a First-Time CMO example, we created a physical book, we created an ebook, essentially like an online version, and an audiobook on a podcast. So this just allows people to engage with it in whichever format they prefer. But the main point here is just not to just do the same thing that you've always done because you've always done it that way. Just because you're used to working with PDFs doesn't mean it's necessarily the best format. For example, PDFs can't be updated once they're downloaded on someone's desktop. And you can't track how people are interacting with your PDF once it's downloaded. And they're also not interactive. But for example, a web page, you can still gate it if you need to gate it, but it has all three of those things. So that's why we chose an interactive web page for our latest ebook rather than a sort of PDF format. Move on, thank you. So another easy way to add value to your content is using a subject matter expert. The person who is writing your ebook may not have ever worked on this subject or knows much about the problem that you're addressing. So an easy way to add credibility and like value to that content is by working with someone who has experience in that field. And ideally, you would want that person to be somewhat recognizable. Maybe they have a personal brand, or they have some sort of online presence, and they're known for being knowledgeable or experienced in that field. And another couple of benefits of working with a subject matter expert include sharing the workload. They can help you create the content. They can help create videos and potentially write sections of the ebook. And they can also add their own opinions. Sometimes what a brand can say and what an individual subject matter expert can say, like a subject matter expert can be a little bit more outspoken. And so they can just add that extra perspective to your ebook. Next slide, please, Fran. And then some other ideas that we've played around with to help sort of bump up the perceived value of an ebook is extra resources or interactive elements. So in our recent ultimate ebook on producing ebooks, we created a distribution checklist. So this was like a downloadable checklist that people could use to make sure that they covered off all the different places that they could distribute their ebook. But other extra resources could be like exclusive interviews or templates, extra podcast content, or swipe files, for example. And then interactive elements. In our recent ebook, we created a decision tree video where we were able to click through answers that were most relevant to the reader and come up with an answer, a solution to a problem at the end of it. But you could create polls, you could have moving icons, just things that make that page that little bit more fun to interact with. And then the last one. The all-important question when it comes to creating ebooks is how much are you going to gate? Obviously, in our ebooks, we go ungated, but we understand that not every business model is going to suit that. Some people need to be passing leads over to sales. So it just comes down to how much time you have before you pass those leads on. There's a few options, basically, that we came up with for ideas if you are gating your content. You could gate half of your ebook, and that way the reader would have to have read at least the first half of your ebook in order to see the gate to request for the second half. And that way, hopefully, any of the leads that you do pass over to sales has at least engaged with that content, has read it, and would hopefully remember that they read it when your sales team did reach out. Or if you do need to get your entire ebook, there is an option to add them into a community or create like a sort of post download nurture sequence. Idea being that you give them additional value, more relevant content before they receive a call from a sales team. And then that's my slide.
Cool, thank you so much. I think I was just thinking about this actually. I think it can be a little bit daunting we rely heavily on like subject matter experts, and we talk about that all the time, don't we? And we do have subject matter experts we have partnerships with that we work with on a regular basis. However, even if you don't have this in place at your company, I do think that these experts are definitely more willing to contribute than you actually think. I think it can sometimes feel like a big ask. I know when we were building our podcast, we were concerned about how we're going to get guests, how we're going to get these like experts to talk around these topics, and guests and contributors often see value for them too. I think for themselves, I think it's just about being able to communicate that value back up to them and show how we will then distribute that content to get them like further reach and recognition as well. So I'd say like, even if you don't have like in-house subject matter experts, or you don't have like a long-standing relationship with a subject matter expert, it's definitely possible to get one-off contributions for eBooks. I don't know what you two think, but I think it can be a bit scary, but I think it's definitely possible.
Well, and also you said something there, in-house, like there's loads of people that will be in-house that may have more experience potentially than the person that is writing the ebook content. So you can always rely on senior marketers or senior salespeople to input on that content if it's really.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think I'd actually add to that. I think the one thing I think that separates what can often be a bad ebook from a good ebook is that, like, I think the historically bad ones is when you get like, and you see it quite a lot, you sort of like get a handful of like quotes from like a selection of SMEs, and it would be like the really minimal insights, but it'd sort of be slapped together into one asset. I don't think that offers as much value. I think if you can really like get deep with an SME and then take like a lot of insight and drive that into the piece, like that's where the value comes from. I think like definitely avoiding sort of, well, I've seen a lot of pieces where you get sort of like little sort of quotes here and there. That's not as helpful. I think when you've got a couple of SMEs really driving the content, that's when you sort of get a really, really good piece and a really like helpful piece that actually educates and helps you do a better job moving forward.
Yeah, most definitely. I agree there. And then as you've taken the floor, Jamie, do you want to continue with distributing your ebook and the best way, how you tackled it for us anyway? So.
Yeah, sounds good. I just wanted to sort of tackle today how you can distribute your ebook and how you can promote it and basically launch it to the maximum amount of eyeballs possible. And I think it's important to frame this in the context of, I think when often, and I've definitely been guilty of this, like in my career points, is I think it's very easy when you have a long form asset or a big chunky asset to think, okay, we're going to do a launch, we're going to do a big launch, and we're going to do, okay, right, what we're going to do? We're going to do our launch emails, then we're going to do our like ads, and we're going to get a bunch of banners set up on the website to drive traffic to it. And you kind of go through this exercise where you're almost doing like a checklist of, okay, right, we'll get this on this channel, and we'll get this on this channel, we'll do this and we'll do this. And what you end up with is basically a bunch of baseline activity across all of your owned and paid channels, which is good. Like you 100% need to cover that off, and you need to do that to maximize your reach and maximize the assets you have available to you. But I think what marketers can fall guilty to sometimes is that is what launch is like you're just covering your bases and getting stuff onto the channels. What I'd encourage, and I think is what can actually make all the difference, especially when you're launching a bigger asset, is really putting some thought and some time into the tactics and the initiatives that you put into those channels to multiply the launch far beyond what's possible just with the baseline activity of your paid and owned channels. There's only so far that's going to take you. And I think something that I've definitely done at Cognism, and we've worked together on, well, all of us, is trying to think about how we multiply launches and the campaigns in general far beyond what's possible on our own channels. And there's a few things we've done and a few things that we've seen as well that I think is really helpful to share today, and sort of just give some ideas to everyone watching, and particularly if it's relevant for them, they can try themselves. But yeah, really just sort of like some ideas to help multiply your launch. And the first thing I'd start at is injecting a scarcity driven offer into your launch messages. And so what I sort of mean by that, and the way I sort of think about that, is can you use a scarcity driven offer to increase the motivation in your launch messages that you go out with, increase the motivation to either download, to sign up, to consume, to click through, whatever that may be. And to give you an example of what I mean by that, one thing that we did, we launched our CMO's book back in February, which is called The Diary of a First Time CMO. And when we launched that book, one sort of offer and initiative that we incorporated into all the launch messaging was that we were giving away 100 free copies of the book to the first 100 people that signed up and signed up for interest in the book. And when we did that, like, we anticipated the scarcity behind it, and sort of like using that tactic would make it feel more prestigious, increase the perceived value of the asset. But it definitely went beyond our expectations. We ended up having about 4,000 people sign up requesting the book, basically taking us up on the offer, which was obviously fantastic. But then we had the 4,000 people. So the first 100 people of those 4,000 did get their physical copy of the book. But I think what the real value of that was that we then, by using that offer, we had thousands of very engaged marketers who had already psychologically committed themselves to wanting to read the book, to wanting to get the book. And basically what we did a couple of days after that, and this was all part of the campaign launch, was that after we went out with that offer, a couple of days later, we went out to the people who didn't make the first 100, and we said, unfortunately, you didn't make the first 100 signups, but we do have the online version that we're releasing today, which is like the ebook version, basically. And you can check that out for free here. You can go and check that out now. Enjoy the online version. And since then, since we've actually had that campaign live, I think we've had about 5,000 users visit the online version. Which obviously you can sort of see the power of it, in that we had that asset as soon as we put that offer in. We had people take us up on that offer, and then we built that sort of engaged audience. We then had that asset available to us, and ultimately as well, what that helped drive was people who did miss out on the book. They were commenting on social. They were talking about, oh, did you get one of the first 100 copies? Stimulated that conversation and sort of that dark social activity. Which only just helps increase the perceived value of the book, makes the asset more desirable, and basically just supercharges the launch in the campaign. So obviously you might not have a book to give away. You might not have a physical book to give away, but I think there's plenty of ways to think about this. Like, for example, let's say you release a really valuable ebook or long form asset. Like, you could tie an offer into that where, say, if you went out a week before, you can maybe say that the first 100 people to sign up to hear about the launch will be entered into a prize draw for one-on-one training related to whatever the topic of the ebook's about. There's plenty of ways to sort of think about that, but it's just basically thinking about what's a limited offer, what's a scarce offer that we can inject into that launch to make the asset more valuable, and sort of drive that desirability and make people more motivated to click through, get that initial sort of interest. So I'd 100% recommend that. Secondly, what we've seen a lot of success with, and I'm sure a lot of people would have encountered this at some point, is working with influencers and SMEs on your launch and in your campaign. So I think when this is done well, it is incredibly powerful in terms of extending the reach beyond what's possible on your owned and paid channels. So I think there's two reasons why it's so powerful. One is that when an influencer or an SME, a third party, posts or engages or shares your asset, it gives that asset and authority that you could never get on your own. Like, no matter how good your launch message is, no matter how good your copywriting is, no matter what, it will never be as powerful and give as much authority as an authoritative person in your space advocating on your behalf. So that's one part of it. And then second, if you can coordinate influencers together, particularly on a launch day, I think on a launch day, it can be very, very powerful, because obviously you get a group together, coordinated, you can take over space in the feed for the day. You can really dominate someone's headspace in a particular moment in time. But in general, those influencers can combine their networks to extend your reach way beyond your own channels. And I think those two things work together really well to give you a really long tail effect, even beyond sort of like your initial launch period. I think in terms of getting this right and making this successful, there's two ways to approach it. So obviously one is to recruit external influencers. If you want to be successful, in my experience, and in my sort of like encounters with sort of trying to run these initiatives, I think you need to approach it in one or two ways. One is you need to have some sort of incentive to get the external influencer bought in, whether that's monetary or whether that's an exchange of, like, they get an asset in exchange for supporting the launch, some sort of like giveaway. They need some sort of very juicy incentive to get involved. I think it's very difficult to get those external influencers involved without that. And then particularly as it's a high lift activity, I think it's something you definitely need to have. If you don't have a ready to go incentive, if you don't have budget, if you don't have something you can give away, the other thing I would recommend is if you are really keen to get external influencers involved, you can look at, okay, what influencers or SMEs have we worked with in the past? Who has a good relationship with anyone in the company or anyone in the team? And prioritize those people, because they may be more receptive to you just going out because they have a good relationship with your company or with someone in the team. You can go out and say, listen, we've got this new asset coming up. We'd be really grateful if you'd be willing to get involved in the launch and share a post or repost or comment, whatever activity you ask, whatever the ask is. But those who like high would prioritize. But it's a very high lift activity, the external influencer piece. I think it's much easier when you do have an incentive in place. So that's kind of what I'd recommend. Second to that, there's obviously using your internal SMEs, and we'd recommend that even if you're going and you're using external influencers, I'd highly recommend using and utilizing any internal SMEs or experts you have in the company with a following. And the way that we approach that at Cognism is that during the sort of planning phase, we'll identify who are the most relevant people to contribute towards our launch. And we just make it as easy as possible for those people to get involved. So taking all of the work basically off of them. So that's supplying copy or posts if necessary, making it as easy as possible for them to record content you can use later on. But basically setting it up so that those people don't have to do basically much work to contribute towards it. And if you can offer any incentive as well internally towards that, whether that's just basically sort of like stating the value they get out of it as well, because they've got a really great asset to share, whatever that may be. Yeah, I'd 100% recommend always getting your internal SMEs involved, because it's a very low lift and low hanging fruit for you to extend the reach of your launch. So yeah, 100% recommend getting involved with SMEs and influencers. And then thirdly, I wanted to touch on basically anchoring your asset and the launch of your asset around a launch event. And I think it's really important to clarify. I think that it's very important this is only powerful when it's done well and when it's done in a thought out way, I believe. And I think a really good example of this is recently an entrepreneur, like prominent voice in like sales and marketing space, Alex Hormozy, released his new book. And he anchored the launch of that book around a launch event, an online event, and drove, I think, 208,000 registrants to the event. And he did that launch in a way that I think anyone can learn from and potentially implement themselves. And it's quite an elegant sort of process. His first messages that he went out with when promoting that launch event, he very much tied in to those first messages that anyone who attended the event was going to get, basically incentivized them to attend and register. with a bunch of giveaways and a bunch of incentives, and used a bunch of FOMO tactics to drive the numbers up. So I think one part of that was he basically, anyone who attended the event was going to get access to a library of resources, and he was very clear about what those resources were, that he'd been working on alongside the book, and it would only be available to specific people that had attended the event. I think he also encouraged all of his email list basically to help him refer people to the launch, and utilize that audience to drive more people. And I think another incentive was that he basically offered one-on-one consulting or training to, I think someone's going to win it if they signed up or attended. So he basically just put in a big bevy of giveaways and goodies to try and drive that initial registrant and attendee number. Once he had those numbers, he leveraged that as social proof throughout all of the messages that came after that first announcement. So in any sort of email or post or anything that went out about the event or about the asset, he was constantly talking about how many people had signed up, and like hundreds of thousands of people, obviously. How people signed up, how big the event was going to be, how big a deal it was. And by doing that, he had already attached that social proof directly to his asset. So even before anyone had seen the asset or what was in it or what value it was going to provide, he had already cranked up the perceived value of that asset and made it more desirable just through having a big launch event. And then finally, obviously, he used the launch event to sell the long form asset, the book in this case, in a much more personalized way. So he was able to basically dive into the full value of the book and talk about the nuance behind it and the depth of and the richness that's in the book in a much more deep way than just like you would be able to for an ad or a post or an email. And yeah, I think it's just a really simple process that I think any of us could sort of like implement in our own way. Obviously, it's not always going to be the same as driving 200,000 people. It's not what everyone else. It's not what everyone else sort of numbers normally work with. But I think there's something to be learned there. So yeah, Fran, if you can go to the next slide.
Yeah, of course. We just had a question actually from Rebecca, and I thought it would be a good time to address it. It's a very good point in that when we are looking at doing these offers and launches and we're providing like incentives and incentivizing, do we find that the ones that are instant value are more engaged with, like you will like sign up here and you will get a copy of the like CMO diary, as opposed to something that takes more time, like one-to-one training and consultation? Because I know like at Cognism, we've done kind of both. Like we've done like instant, this is what you're going to get. And then we've also done like, you know, one-to-one sessions with our like subject matter experts. Over me, like it's, my thoughts are that the instant gratification and like that you're actually going to get something tangible works better. But I would also argue it's the way you communicate that value. So you have to almost sell the incentive back. But I don't know what your thoughts are, Jamie, on that.
No, I completely agree. Yeah, I think it's much easier to sell that instant giveaway, basically, because it's tangible. You're definitely going to get it, and it's like something someone can go, if I do this, I'm going to get X. So it is an easier sort of, and it's probably drives that little bit more interest. But I think it's sort of basically it's what you're able to do and what resources you have at the time. I think the important lesson to draw away from it is that ultimately it's about, like, if you're going out with a launch message, no matter what channel you're on, if there's a way to stimulate the motivation, increase the motivation of that audience to click through, to basically commit to the action that you're after, it's worth implementing. But obviously it does come down to, you need to think about what can we implement. Obviously some offers are going to be better than others. But I think if you can implement either way of doing it, if it's a little bit like more instant versus maybe it's not instant, they both have value. They might just scale to different extents.
Yeah, definitely. It makes sense. I think as well, I was thinking on the on what that might be. It doesn't actually have to be anything huge. It could just be something very, very tactical. So like we're the eBooks talking about X, Y, and Z. Here's a very good go-to template, or an interactive template that will help you do your job better. So I was at an event last week, and we were looking at different like demand gen examples, and one of the companies markets to HR. So they provided HR with like an interactive calendar for like people's reviews and things like that. And that's just a very, very value-add resource that has been used regularly. So maybe something like interactive, even if it's just a very basic interactive template or something, I think that can actually work. Don't think it has to be like consultation every time. But yeah, cool. Sorry, I could go on, but I will not. I will move on. Here we go.
Yeah, just a couple more bits I want to touch on. So first one, paid social. So obviously, I think for a lot of people maybe listening, like getting ads live to promote your asset is going to be one of the first things on your to-do list. There's just a few things we wanted to share that I think has been, to be honest, just been really successful for us whenever we're promoting assets like this on paid. So first thing would be incentivize the audience and the people who download or read or consume to post to their socials, reviewing the asset or like telling you why they enjoyed it, and then use that post literally as like a screenshot, use that as the creative for the ad. We found that by doing this quite often, you can basically get click-through rates and engagement rates on those like static ads that can often be double or triple what you get on like a typical sort of like content ad, like a static ad. And it's a really quick win. Like if you can just incentivize a portion of the people who read it or download it to do that, you've got a really scalable supply often of creatives and ads that you can keep cycling in. And they tend to perform really well. So I'd highly recommend doing that. And I think the second point links into that as well. With your SMEs, anytime they post about the asset, any video they record, get that, use that as your ads, and basically just lend their credibility to your ad campaigns. And it's very likely you're going to see your metrics pumped up. Just by, I think one of the reasons that particularly the screenshots and stuff work well is just the authenticity and the credibility of a screenshot of someone's post, for example, can just basically just a lot more believable and stimulates a lot more action in someone coming across an ad just on the feed. So yeah, highly recommend that. And then thirdly, on paid as well, definitely recommend experimenting with ad formats. One thing that we've found worked quite well with long form assets is when we've repurposed the ebook or the long form asset into document ads on LinkedIn. And what we find is, because it's difficult sometimes to convey the full value of a long form asset in a static ad, or even sometimes even a video if you want to keep the video on the shorter side. But an ebook can be like really unpacked in a document ad, and you can really sell what's in it and like the value of it, and that even just obviously give away the value in that ebook ad and get engagement off the back of that. So one thing we've experimented and had a lot of engagement with, so I'd highly recommend potentially testing that. The next thing I would definitely look at as well is leaning into your customer base for referrals and advocacy. So getting your customers to help you with the distribution of your ebook. Ultimately, your customers are likely to have a very relevant network to share the asset with. So we'd highly recommend incentivizing those guys to either, there's a few ways you can do it. You can get referral links, share referral links with those guys to directly drive traffic to the asset. You can get them to just post reviews of the asset to their personal channels. So like linking back to the paid social point, getting them to like talk about why they enjoyed the ebook, post like it's a great asset, etc. Or even if it's just like something as simple as getting them to repost your launch announcements. Like that can be a really low lifting for them to do and can be a really small ask if you can incentivize them to do that. And I think in terms of incentivizing the customer base, I think, to be honest, one of the simple ways to do that is if you can give away any sort of product related rewards as the incentive. So for example, things like free credits and stuff like that. If you can do that, it's a really easy incentive to give away for a lot of companies. Not everyone's gonna be able to do that, but for a lot of you might be able to. And yeah, I'd also look at, can you make those rewards like tiered rewards? So you base the number of, like, let's say credits for this example. Let's say that for one post from your audience, from your customer, they'll get X amount of credits. If they do more activity, it goes up a level, they get more, goes up a level, they get more. And you can do that way, basically just give them an incentive to basically help you distribute the ebook. And it's a really effective and free way often to extend the reach beyond your own channels. And then finally, this is more of a long-term play. And it's not something we're currently doing a lot of at Cognism, but I think Amy touched on it earlier. Duro do this really well, is basically building an owned community, an audience to help you distribute your long form assets, your content. And I think Duro do this. I think it's quite often the first touch point for them whenever they release a new ebook or asset. But ultimately, one of the reasons this works is that if you build a community like that, they obviously a much more engaged audience, which makes them much more likely to either download or consume the content. You can then use that engaged audience to basically refer new people to it, or to review the asset, linking back to the paid social point again. And also, I think it's quite a quick and easy way. If you release your ebook, for example, to your community before you go for a wider launch to a mass audience, you can get feedback fast and quicker and easier from a relevant audience, and it might give you a little bit more time to optimize pieces of the launch and pieces of your asset that you might not have thought of before, and you basically go out with a much better asset, which is going to help you launch anyway. So yeah, that's, if we move to the next slide, Fran. And yeah, just some final suggestions just quickly as well. I think definitely don't just like consign the ebook to just being an ebook, no matter what format you put it in. It can be a lot of things. You can repurpose that into a YouTube series, podcast series, a series of bite-sized blogs. I'd encourage everyone to really think about how can you repackage that information to serve different content preferences. I'd also think about, well, can we use remarketing campaigns versus like a typical sales call follow-up to actually lead with value in the follow-up process? That's something I'd really encourage. And something that we do at Cognism a lot, particularly when we've got really juicy long-form assets, is we'll turn those long-form assets into a newsletter series, which kills two birds with one stone, basically. It means we've got really great content to put into the newsletter, and basically keep the newsletter sustained for weeks at a time. And also it just gives another channel, another format, another way of presenting that information and getting the ebook in front of different eyeballs as well. Yeah, but if we just move to the next slide. Cool. And yeah, just wanted to quickly touch on post-download nurtures and nurturing in general. So I think for us, what we encourage everyone to sort of think about in terms of when you release an asset like this is, I think it's important not to necessarily get pigeonholed into the idea that a nurture has to be what we've always done in B2B, which is like that sort of 4 to 5 step nurture where you might send a couple more resources, then you send some product information related to the topic, and then it's sort of like a product offer maybe, and you're trying to sort of funnel them down into a demo or a product offer. Like if you're doing that, like, and that's a priority for the company, like that's fine. That's just something that's happening at a business level in your company. But I think it's important to really think through what is the goal of your nurture and what you're trying to accomplish. I think there's different ways to approach the nurture. For example, at Cognism, like what we're trying to achieve, and I think Fran touched on this a little bit earlier, is when we're putting a nurture out, when we're sort of nurturing people who might engaged or consumed our content, we're trying to drive people to what we call our value loops, which are basically subscription channels. So like our podcast, our YouTube channel, our newsletters, etc. So basically we can get repeated value in front of those people year round. They've signed up to hear more from us repeatedly. And that means that we can stay top of mind with that audience, and stay in front of that audience all the time, because we're not trying to convert those people in the moment. What we're trying to do is stay top of mind with them. So if they do end up having a need for a product like ours, it's much more likely they're going to be able to recall us because we're front of mind and we've stayed front of mind after that initial touch point. And then finally, to be honest, I actually also consider the email nurture doesn't even need to be an email nurture. You can think about, if you have a list of, like, for example, if you have downloads or if you have signups, if you have a list of people who've engaged, you can turn that into potentially a remarketing list, and then think about, well, maybe we actually nurture these people with relevant ads, remarketing ads relevant to the ebook, serve them either additional content, you serve them maybe more giveaway content related to the ebook, or maybe just reserve them the ebook for pieces they may not have seen. But really think about, do we actually need to be, does it need to be an email? But I think we just encourage that there's different pathways to go down, and you can review the slides after, because we'll be sending these out after, But yeah, I just encourage people to think about what the goal of your nurture is, and think about it's not always got to be the traditional nurture. If you do that, that's fine, but we'd encourage you to think about what else can be possible.
Cool, amazing. Oh, here's your example.
Oh yeah, so I actually forgot that.
Forgot about that, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. So yeah, this is actually an example, and you can check this out afterwards, guys. So yeah, this is what we mean by one of our nurtures I was talking about, directing to our value loop. So like we said, we're trying to drive people into those subscription channels, and basically just to give you the frame of mind that we're in when we're creating these nurtures and these emails, what we're trying to achieve is we want to create a pleasant experience that continues the journey from that initial bit of content. And we use, typically of Cognism, we use a lot of humor, we use a lot of memes and stuff in our nurtures. And we're trying to create a pleasant experience that continues that journey on, serves them relevant value-led content along with that humor and that sort of pleasant experience. And hopefully by providing that, they're more likely to want to join our communities, our subscription channels, our value loops, and then we can continue to provide that value. But yeah, that's pretty much everything from me. I'm just going to hand over to Fran now, who's going to talk a little bit about sort of like how we measured eBooks and report on that. And yeah, thanks everyone.
Amazing. Thank you, Jamie. That was really valuable. I love these. I love that you share these little nurtures. We can also share links to those, can't we, anyway, for our nurtures on demand as well. That might be good to share. So yeah, cool. So yeah, the big question is how do we measure eBooks when I suppose particularly when we operate in a world where we don't collect leads anymore. So I'm just going to run through like ways in which we think about measuring this. So to begin, I think the main thing that we've learned is before you start measuring your ebook, you actually need to be aligned to like the core goal that you're trying to achieve. And I know that might seem really, really obvious, but it's something that we have overlooked in the past. So you need to kind of work out what the main goal is and then align the team on that. Otherwise, the metrics are just not going to be useful and the data is not going to be useful. So you might be targeted on the number of leads. So if you're targeted on the number of leads for your ebook, like what is the main goal? Is it a certain number of leads, or is it less leads but higher quality leads? Because obviously there's a big difference there. And you have to think about like what that goal could look like and how you're going to measure that. Because essentially, if you're more concerned with the quality of those leads, you don't want to be your team to be reporting weekly or monthly and saying, I don't know, we've got 1,000 downloads for our ebook this month or a couple of hundred leads from our ebook. But then you don't know like who those people are, or the data is incomplete and you don't know exactly like what size companies they're from or what industry they're from, etc., etc. So really you've got to define that key goal and work out how you're going to measure that. Cognism, so our primary goal is to provide value-driven content to our core ICP, as we've said numerous times, and we talk about a lot. But we have to have this alignment on what that looks like. So for us, it's like we need to, if we're going to provide this value-driven content, it needs to be all around engagement. So we can measure the value by the engagement that we get back. And then we want to like outline these core metrics like based on engagement and thus perceived value from that engagement. So yeah, so once aligned, you need to ensure you're measuring the right metrics. And I would also say at this point that once you have those goals in place, you do need to be prepared to measure everything beyond number of leads or pipeline or revenue. I think you have to think about what comes before that as well. So that leads me on to our leading indicators. So again, regardless of whether you decide to gate your ebook, collect leads, or ungate, your first focus should be on these leading indicators. So once you're putting the content out there, is it resonating? What qualitative feedback have you received? So I think that's not to be overlooked. So often when we launch a campaign or an ebook, we will get responses to our email nurtures, or we'll get comments on LinkedIn with like super valuable feedback and what the reader has enjoyed the most. So that's super valuable for when continuing to like make that campaign work harder for us. How does the engagement on paid social look? So I think this is quite a big one. I remember when we moved from like collecting leads, so we stopped using the forms on LinkedIn, and then we moved to just making sure that we were providing value like in the actual LinkedIn feed. So we were basically, our main goal was around providing stopping the scroll. That's what they're the words I'm looking for. Our main value was around stopping the scroll and getting people engaged with our content there and then. But then we got to the weekly report on a Friday and we were reporting on click-through rate. So again, that's why that alignment is super important. And when you're looking at the engagement metrics, you need to be looking at the right ones. So yes, click-through rate, if that makes sense, and cost per click, if that makes sense. Like for us, we now, if we're promoting something in feed, we look at engagement rate, we look at the likes, we look at the comments, we look at like the frequency, the impressions, the reach. So there's so much that you can measure. So just be very clear on what that might look like. We do also have campaigns where we want to optimize and get our audience to a landing page, and we want to continue this value-led journey with our audience. So again, that's where click-through rate would come in. And then we would look at things like time on page, bounce rate, like the traffic going to that page. So I think like these leading indicators will show if your content is resonating, if it's having a positive impact. So you can compare channels as well. So which channels and format is performing best. Again, you can't measure them all in the same way, and like, I'm not going to lie, it's not exactly comparing apples for apples, but at the same time, it's if you've launched your content on a podcast versus a blog, it might be that the podcast, although they're different metrics that you're measuring, you might have had that particular episode, you could have had like, I don't know, 100 downloads in a week, whereas normally your podcast, you get 20 downloads in a week. So you know that that's working really well. And maybe the blog hasn't had as much engagement. So you can then look at which formats are performing best and double down on that. I'd also, I mentioned it previously, look at who's engaging. So it's great, I think, to have the quantitative numbers and say like, oh, we've had, I don't know, like 100 people download the ebook, or we've got lots of people that have signed up for an event. But it's really important to then deep dive who they actually are, because you want to know that you're reaching the right people. And you want to know that that's going to influence like the buying cycle later down the line. So I think the leading indicators are super important. And I also think that we need to get better and stronger at communicating these back upwards to senior leadership. So however we look at presenting those, I would say try and tell a story with that data. So it's not going to be lots of different slides with like different tables on and no commentary. You might even want to do something like, which we've done for like board presentations before. You might want to do a video of a quick fire video of all the positive comments that we've had from like a particular piece of content, or how much our audience like are engaging with Cognism. And then you can present that as well as presenting your overarching metrics, like your number of leads, your pipeline and revenue figures as well. So it is possible to do that. And I think like, don't be scared to get like creative with how you're presenting those results back upwards. And then of course, like, there are lagging indicators. So for us, like, our core goal will be, one of our sort of key goals is to drive inbound demo requests. So it's important that we measure this. So like, what are those inbound demo requests generating? How does that then feed into pipeline, which is another goal of ours? So, and marketing do hold that pipeline and revenue target. But we also say this quite often, but the buyer journey isn't linear. So you've got to be comfortable with the fact that we can't 100% line up every attribution point. So instead, the way we work is to look for trends in the data. And we try to keep this really simple in how we'll track these trends, because, well, I don't know about anyone else's company, but like Cognism, our tech stack is quite heavy, and there are lots of different, and I think particularly like the paid social platforms have got a lot better at providing stats and data, but the risk is that you can be getting like lots of different bits of data from here, there, and everywhere, and trying to like paint this picture. and then it becomes like quite confusing and quite difficult. So Jamie touched on it earlier, but when we launched our Diary of a CMO campaign, we looked for positive trends in like our inbound demo requests. So when we launch a campaign like that, we call it our Big Rock campaign, but that's like an evergreen campaign we can run for the year. And we know upon launch that when we launch that and when we do launch these big rocks, we know that we do see that trend upwards and we do see that impact in inbound demo requests. We can't attribute it to every single one, but we can just look generally at those trends. Also, I think it's just really important to agree when you're thinking about UTMs, what you're how you're weighting them. So for us, for the purpose of this exercise, we agreed to look at both first and last touch and give them both equal weight, just because it's really hard to say just because somebody's come in as like a last touch that piece is like fully contributed to it. Like we can't, there's lots of dark social going on. There's this whole patch, I guess, that you can't necessarily track. So for example, somebody could come in inbound from a Google ad and like we're like, okay, so Google Ads brought this like deal in, fantastic. But they could have actually been listening to our podcast for like 6 months, or they could have been engaging with the Diary of a CMO. So we've just got to be really realistic in that we can't track everything. And then once you've agreed on what you track, that's what you stick to. So for us, we've first and last touch at equal weight, and then positive trends on inbound demo requests. So again, like as we saw the above increase, we knew the campaign was having this positive impact. And then also we looked at the source well to see which channels were driving this impact. So again, it can be it doesn't have to be complicated. I think you just need to agree with your team, except you can't track everything, or you won't know you can track as much as possible, but you won't know everything about that particular journey. So I think it's important that when we're looking at like pipeline and things like that, it's just got to be realistic about where that pipeline has come from. Oh, hang on a second. Oh, the slide's been repeated. I will move on. There's also some extra reporting options, which I did want to share. So basically, we are trying to always uncover different ways to slice and dice the data. And it's really hard sometimes when we don't live in a lead gen world and we're not targeted on lead generation specifically to paint this positive picture. So one thing which we did implement was human verified attribution. So on our thank you page, we ask if somebody fills out an inbound demo request, we ask how they've heard about us. So this is like a great way to uncover insights that you might not have been able to see. So this is where we get a lot of, it's really hard to measure our podcast, for example. So this is where we get a lot of comments saying we've been listening to your podcast, or this particular episode was good, or we follow Dave in your sales team on LinkedIn and we create all of Dave's content, and we follow him and we got to know Cognism. So it's really actually interesting to be able to uncover those insights, and as you get more data around that, you can start bucketing it into to make it more, I guess, digestible as well when you're presenting that data back upwards. Also, like another thing is like heat maps, which we started playing around with Hotjar. So there's not you can't always see that beyond how many people have downloaded like a PDF if like you're using a PDF. But if you actually do choose to host an ebook on site, which we have, then you can see where people are interacting with that content, which for us, we've released it into like multiple chapters. So we can see like the most popular chapters, and we'll know like that we need to double down on that particular content because it's something that's of interest. So yeah, again, it gives you more insight as well on how you can iterate that page. And then finally, something that we do have started using more and more this year is Gong. So I don't know what everyone else's sort of call recording software that they use, but for us, like Gong's super important because it's a wealth of information to us on where we can listen to prospect calls, customer calls. But not only that, we can add triggers. So we can understand when we can get alerted when somebody mentions our podcast or specific event or specific initiative. So that's amazing in terms of like being able to add some extra depth to the reporting. So we might be able, again, like I keep using the podcast because it's an easy example to use, but we might not be able to have like concrete quantitative stats on the data because we don't know, like you can't pull that data out of the podcast platform of like who's actually listening. But if we can team human attribution and mention the podcast mentions in gong calls, then we can see that as our podcast is getting mentioned more and more, that initiative is worth doubling down on. So it is really about getting creative with your reporting, and again just agreeing on what those points look like. But yeah, that's just like some ideas that we have had recently and that we've been using. So there we are. Again, I've covered reporting sort of quite lightly because it's a topic that we talk about often and I could go on about. But if anyone does have any additional questions, please pop them in the chat and we can answer them now, or we can, if you want to send us an email, then we can respond via email, or if you want to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn, then please do so. I haven't checked, Jamie, do we have any questions we need to answer, or are we?
I think we've had them all in the chat, unless someone comes swooping in now, but I think we've had everything in the chat, to be honest.
Okay, cool. Oh yeah, I see you've been answering them. Very nice.
I think we can wrap up, unless anyone comes in, but I think we can wrap up.
Okay, cool, great. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Jamie and Amy, for joining me on the Loop Live, and thank you everybody for joining and for your contributions. And we will share the slides afterwards and also the recording. And as I said, if you do want to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn or email us with your questions, we are always happy to answer them. So yeah, have a great day. Thanks,
everyone.